They don't do this. That's the thing you need to understand before anything else. Before the context, before the details, before I tell you what's moving in their energy right now and why you need to understand the weight of what's happening by understanding who it's happening in. This person has a pattern, a long, consistent, well established pattern that the people in their life could describe without hesitation if asked. They don't pursue, they don't reach, they don't cross the distance between themselves and what they want with any visible urgency because they've never had to, and more than that, because something in the architecture of who they are made the posture of pursuit feel like a kind of exposure they weren't built to tolerate. They wait, they signal, they make themselves available in the particular controlled way of someone who wants to be found but will not be seen looking. That's who they've always been. Until something happened inside them that they don't entirely have language for yet. I want to try to describe it because I think the feeling of it, the actual internal experience of this person encountering you in a way that overrode their most practiced patterns is important for you to understand. It wasn't a decision. That's the first thing. This isn't someone who sat down, weighed the options, consulted their own logic, and arrived at the conclusion that pursuing you was the rational next step. It was more involuntary than that, more like a force that operated below the level of their conscious reasoning, something that moved through them before they had the chance to intercept it with the self protective hesitation they normally deploy so fluently. You got in before the defenses engaged, and now they're in the unfamiliar position of wanting something they can't manage from a distance, of feeling a pull toward you that their usual tools, patience, composure, the dignified performance of not needing, simply don't address. Because those tools only work when the wanting is mild enough to be contained. What they feel about you is not mild. It hasn't been mild for a while. And the containment which they've been attempting with decreasing success for longer than you might realize has finally, quietly, completely failed. What you're experiencing now is the result of that failure. And it is not a small thing. Let me tell you about who this person is, not in biographical terms, but in the particular texture of their emotional nature, because understanding them is part of understanding why this moment is so significant. They move through the world with a quality of self containment that other people frequently mistake for coldness. It isn't coldness, it's the cultivated composure of someone who learned at some formative point that need was a vulnerability and vulnerability was a liability. That showing what you wanted gave other people power over you that could, and in their experience, sometimes did get used badly. So they became self sufficient in the emotional sense, skilled at not appearing to require anything from anyone, practiced at the particular art of wanting things quietly from behind glass in ways that preserved their dignity regardless of outcome. They are good at this, genuinely skilled too. Most people who know them would describe them as hard to read, private, someone who always seems to have things together in a way that suggests they need very little. What those people don't see is the internal life, the depth of it, the fact that someone who shows little feels enormous amounts, that the containment is the management of something large, not evidence of something small. You, Virgo, with your extraordinary sensitivity, your capacity to read what isn't spoken, your instinct for the emotional reality beneath the presented surface you saw through the glass. And that is what undid them. Being truly seen by someone when you have spent years perfecting the art of remaining unseen is not a comfortable experience. It's exposing in a way that nothing else quite replicates. You can be seen and ignored, that's manageable. You can be seen and misinterpreted, that's frustrating but containable. But to be seen accurately, to have someone look at you with the particular quality of understanding that says, times I know what you are, not just what you show times, and to have that person receive what they see with warmth rather than using it as leverage that dismantles something. Something dismantled in them the first time they felt you really look at them, and then kept dismantling quietly every time they were in your presence. Every time you said something that demonstrated you understood not just the surface of them, but the architecture beneath. Every time you responded to the real thing they were communicating rather than the presented version. Every time you gave them the extraordinary, rare gift of being known and still chosen. They didn't know what to do with that. They still don't entirely. But they know they can't let it exist at a distance anymore. I want to describe the chasing because it won't look the way that word usually implies, and I don't want you to miss it because you were looking for something louder than what's actually happening. This person does not have a grand gesture in their emotional vocabulary. They don't do declarations and they don't do dramatic reach outs and they don't arrive with the kind of obvious, unmissable pursuit that makes things easy to categorize. What they do instead, what their version of chasing looks like, is a sustained, intensifying presence. They keep finding reasons to be where you are. Conversations that they initiate under the cover of casual topics, but that they steered toward you with deliberate intention. Messages sent at hours that reveal they were thinking about you in the in between moments of their life, not when it was convenient, but when they couldn't help it. An attentiveness to the details of you that goes beyond what ordinary interest produces, remembering things you mentioned in passing, noticing things that changed, asking follow up questions to conversations from weeks ago as if they'd been sitting with them all that time, because they have been. They've been sitting with you in the private, unseen interior of themselves where they keep the things that matter most. You've been there for longer than they've given any indication of. And now the gap between the private truth and the public performance is becoming impossible to maintain. Watch for the pattern of their reaching. It's already happening. It may have been happening for a while. But now that you're looking for it, you'll see it everywhere in the small, consistent, carefully constructed nearness of someone who never chases anyone, making an exception for you. Something interesting happens to a person like this when they cross the threshold of their own pattern, when they move from their established position, composed, self contained, wading into the unfamiliar territory of active pursuit. They become more themselves, not less. What I mean is this: the composure, the self containment, the careful management of how much they reveal, those things don't disappear when they start chasing. They're expressed differently. The pursuit is precise rather than effusive, intentional rather than impulsive. They choose each move with a specificity that reflects not recklessness, but the opposite, the deliberate decisions of someone who takes nothing lightly and therefore does nothing casually. Every reach is considered. Every moment of nearness is chosen. Every detail they offer you about themselves, the small, gradual opening up that's begun to happen in your interactions, is a conscious act of trust from someone for whom trust is not given lightly or quickly or without the weight of real intention behind it. When they tell you something true, they've decided to tell you. When they show up, they've decided to show up. When they make the space for you in their world, and they're making it right now in ways both visible and invisible, it is not accidental. It is everything. Virgo, I want to pause here and ask you something, not rhetorically, but genuinely. Have you been letting this land? Because here's what I notice in your energy alongside the energy of this person reaching toward you, a quality of almost receiving, like someone standing in light but slightly angled away from it, not rejecting the warmth but not fully turning toward it either, catching pieces of what's being offered but not quite letting the full thing arrive. This might be self protection. After what you've carried, and you have carried things, the previous chapters of your story have required a particular kind of endurance. It makes complete sense that your system would be cautious, that the arrival of something genuinely good would be met with a portion of your attention while another portion remained on alert, scanning for the familiar shape of disappointment. But I want to offer you a different frame. This person's pattern is the frame. Someone who never chases is not chasing you because they haven't thought it through. They are not impulsive. They are not prone to grand romantic gestures they'll regret tomorrow. The very qualities that make their pursuit feel uncertain, the subtlety of it, the carefulness, the absence of dramatic declaration, are the same qualities that make it reliable. This is not the pursuit of someone swept up in a feeling they'll come down from. This is the pursuit of someone who fought their own instincts, considered carefully, and arrived at you anyway. That is not a small thing to receive. Turn toward it. There's something I keep noticing at the edges of this reading, a kind of reciprocity in the energy between you two that's worth naming. You match each other, not in the superficial sense of shared interests or compatible schedules, though perhaps those things too, in the deeper sense. The emotional architecture of both of you carries similar features: the depth beneath the composed surface, the preference for real over easy, the capacity for loyalty that once given is enormous, the slight wariness around vulnerability that doesn't signal emotional unavailability, but rather emotional seriousness. The sense that things mean things to you, that you don't do anything at half measure once you've decided it matters. Two people built this way, finding each other, recognizing each other across the particular shared language of people who feel everything deeply and show it carefully, is not common. It's rare in the way that things are rare when they require very specific conditions to occur, like a note that only sounds when two particular instruments play it together. Neither instrument knew that note existed until the other one arrived. You're both hearing it. Let me tell you what the near future holds in terms of how this unfolds, not as fixed prediction, but as the energetic current that's already moving between you. Something becomes explicit. The subtext, which has been accumulating in the space between every interaction you've had recently, reaches a saturation point where it can no longer function as subtext, where one of you, and the energy suggests it will be them, pushed past their own threshold by a moment they didn't plan for, says the thing that transforms the implicit into the explicit. This might happen in a conversation that begins about something else entirely and ends somewhere neither of you expected. It might happen in a moment of unguarded honesty, the kind that arrives when two people have been in each other's company long enough that the performed versions of themselves get tired and step aside. It might happen in something written rather than spoken, a message that goes further than they intended, that says more than their usual careful calibration would permit, sent at a moment when the calibration broke. However it arrives, and it is arriving, the current toward it is strong, and getting stronger, the feeling of it will be this: relief, mutual, enormous, almost shocking relief, the particular exhale of two people who have been holding the same breath for a long time and are finally together releasing it. That moment is close. I want to say something about what you deserve here because I think you need to hear it stated plainly without decoration. You deserve someone who crosses their own nature to reach you, not someone for whom you are the convenient option, not someone who chooses you because you were there, because it was easy, because the alternative required more effort. Someone for whom choosing you required something, required the dismantling of a pattern, the overriding of a deep protective instinct, the willingness to be seen wanting something in a way they have never allowed themselves to be seen before. That is what this person is offering, not flowers, not grand words. The thing they have that is most rare and most theirs, their composure, their self-containment, the carefully maintained armor of someone who learned early that exposure was dangerous. They are laying that down for you. Do you understand how significant that is? For someone who never chases, being chased by them is not just being liked. It's being selected from behind every wall they've ever built. It's being the exception to a rule they've lived by long enough that it became identity. You are their exception, not because you tried to be, not because you engineered it or positioned yourself or did anything other than be exactly who you are with the particular quality of authenticity that makes you, Virgo, so impossible to look away from once someone has really seen you. You didn't chase them either. You just existed fully in your own extraordinary particular way, and something in them that had never moved before moved. As this reading closes, I want to leave you with something that isn't advice and isn't instruction, just an observation. The version of you that this person sees, the one that cut through their composure and dismantled their pattern and drew from them a pursuit they have never, in the full history of who they are, offered anyone else, that version of you has always been there. You weren't different for them. You were just you, the real, complete, uncurated, sometimes uncertain, always genuine version of you that you live inside every day and occasionally forget, is extraordinary because you've been inside it your whole life, and proximity makes the remarkable feel ordinary. But it isn't ordinary. It never was. And someone who has been surrounded by ordinary their entire life, who has kept everyone at arm's length precisely because nothing ever felt worth the exposure, looked at you and felt for the first time that the risk made sense, that the opening of the armor was worth it, that you were worth it. They were right. Something about a reading like this tends to bring up a very specific feeling, like recognizing yourself in a mirror you didn't know was there. If that happened for you today, I'd love to know in the comments, even just what's stirring. You don't need the full story, just what's true right now.